This happened last night around 2:30 a.m. I definitely don't want to meet or ever see who I heard last night, but I'm also looking for advice on if I should actually be as freaked out as I am. I'll start off by saying I don't live in the nicest area. It's not crime-ridden, but I don't feel comfortable around any of the people, including my building's security guards who spend a lot of time sleeping in my hometown or apartment building. So last night I was getting ready to go to bed. I turned off my TV, AC, etc., and it was completely silent in my living room. I'm sitting on the couch and I hear people talking from what sounds like the back balcony next to us. I live on a higher floor. Nothing unusual there. Sound permeates our windows easily, I guess, but I had never heard anyone speaking so clearly before. I keep playing around on my phone and I just get weirded out by the tone the more talkative man was speaking in. From what I could tell, there were two men, one older and one younger. I hear the word ransom and my ear perks up. Here's some of what I caught after I began heavily eavesdropping. "She won't be looking for me. She knows you. This ransom was supposed to happen tonight. It still can." This point was reiterated a few times. 5 a.m. This place is like The Walking Dead. People start checking their doors. There's no security in any of the buildings at that time. And snippets of them talking about a neighbor they had who would walk around after she showered, and of an older man telling a younger man something along the lines of, "I'd invite her over while you're gone next week. Buy her a bottle of wine. Get her drunk. But she's yours, so I won't do that." This I thought was particularly weird. If he was referring to a woman that younger man was into, why would he mention getting her drunk alone? My initial paranoid thought was that she is younger man's to take, if that makes sense. It all ended bizarrely. When older man, who I learned lives on a floor below me, came up to my floor and started banging on my neighbor's door. I called security, who came up, and I heard the older man mention it was about my neighbor's dog, who I didn't hear bark at all, so I'm not sure why we would have needed to bang on this door at 3 a.m. Now I'm terrified to leave the apartment since I leave so early. It seems like these creepy neighbor guys might be planning something involving a ransom or worse. What do you guys think? Do I have a reason to be worried? This happened when I was 14 years old. I was in my emo phase, and since nobody understands me, I went online to find people to talk to, and that's where I met my boyfriend. I had been with my boyfriend for about 3 months when this happened, and we were finally going to meet each other. He lived on the other side of the country, so going with a plane would clearly be the quickest, but since we were both young and had no money, he found a cheap bus to go with. It was about Christmas time, and the roads were covered in snow, so of course the bus was late. My boyfriend sent me a text saying that he'd be late. The bus would arrive in a bigger city about 30 minutes away from the one I lived in, and I had already taken the bus there to pick him up, so there was no point in going home. I then texted him, "When are you going to be here then?" "I don't know. The bus driver said he couldn't tell us yet." "I told you he scammed you." "Oh, he says we'll be about 40 minutes late. Sorry, baby." "It's okay. What do you want to do when you get here?" "I want to get something to eat. I should have brought something to the bus." "I'm sorry, but I'm actually really hungry right now. Would it be okay if I get something?" "Of course, baby. What are you getting?" "Thinking about McD's." "Fancy. You know I have no money." I then put my phone in my pocket and walked into McDonald's. There was a lot of people in there, and I considered leaving, but I had no money to get something better than junk food, so I bit the sour apple and stood in line. Then someone walked in and stood behind me. It wasn't anything odd, since the McDonald's I was in was often busy, but suddenly I felt something on my butt, but it quickly disappeared again. I thought it must have been a mistake, and I'm not a sensitive person, so I didn't confront them about it, but then it happened again. This time they poked me more aggressively. "Yo," I thought to myself, but didn't say anything. Then it happened again. I turned around to see a guy putting his phone up to me. Note that I'm a very socially awkward person, and I had no idea what to say, since I had never been in a situation like this. I ended up just smiling an awkward smile and looked at him. He was a 175-centimeter tall, skinny guy who looked like a mess. He then smiled at me and took a step back. Must have been an accident, I thought. but then I felt his phone on me again. I then turned around and quietly said, "Excuse me." He just smiled like nothing had happened and said, "Hi there," in a really happy tone. I didn't even find his smile creepy, and I think that's actually what made this so scary. He sounded and looked like a totally normal person. He kept that tone, even though what he did was super creepy. "Where are you from?" he then asked. I told him I was just from the city, which we were currently in. He just looked at me with that totally normal wide smile and asked again, "Where are you from?" Like he didn't understand what I said. Note that I'm not from an English-speaking country, and the conversation had been in Danish the whole time up until what I did next. I decided I'd pretend to be someone just in case he was some weird stalker creep, because I was honestly getting freaked out. I then began speaking English to him like I was not from here. "Yeah, I'm from California visiting a friend." "Oh, I see," he replied, still smiling. "I'm no good English, I hope understand you." I got relieved as I realized he wasn't good at English, and I hoped he would stop the conversation there. I turned around. There was still at least 5 to 6 groups in front of me who had to order, so there was still a lot of time before it was my turn to order. Then I feel someone tap on my shoulder again. I turned around to look at him, and I gave him a look like, "Please leave me alone, you creep." And he finally seemed to get it because his wide, creepy smile began fading away. His eyes looked wild, but he still looked calm. It was a look that's hard to describe. "How old are you?" he asked. I now said something stupid that I regret saying. I probably should have told him I was only 14 at the time, but then he probably wouldn't believe my story that I was in Denmark all alone. "I'm 17, I then said, old enough to travel by myself, but still not legal. When a creepy smile began appearing on his face again, I knew I messed up. "That's so nice, and where's your friend? Where does she live? How old is she? Is she as pretty as you?" He said and walked up to my side instead of standing behind me. He was way too close, not even 50 centimeters between us. I was completely speechless because I had never experienced something like this. This might not sound all that crazy, but as a 14-year-old, I was freaking out. "I'm 26 myself, but that isn't a problem, is it?" I just looked straight ahead, trying not to make eye contact. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he said in a cold tone. I looked at him with my emo bangs covering my face. He then began touching my face and hair with his filthy hands. "Get that hair away from your face and look at me, baby." I looked at him and he smiled again. That smile was making me absolutely sick, and I wanted to puke everywhere. "There we go. You know, I really love emo chicks," he said, and pulled my hair away from my neck and began kissing and licking my neck. I was furious, but I was completely frozen in shock. He could see that I was getting scared. Everyone could. Everyone saw what he was doing to me, and they heard what he was saying to me, yet nobody did anything. I hate humans. They're so disgusting, and they only think about themselves when it comes to it. He came even closer and began wrapping his arms around me and said, "Come with me. We'll go get your friend," he said, and took my hand. I slapped his hand away and yelled at him, "I'm not a hooker!" I then ran to a place where I could be alone and called my mom, crying. And when my boyfriend met up with me, he comforted me. Again, it's not some big story about how he went on and did terrible things there or anything further. I just found this extremely disturbing as a 14-year-old. I don't want to end my story by saying what he did to me traumatized me so much that I never dared to go to McDonald's ever again, because I actually plan on going there with someone later. I also don't want to end the story saying I will never forget the creepy smile on his face either, because that wouldn't be true. I have a diagnosis that makes it very difficult for me to remember faces, so I'll never know if I see him again. But no matter if I remember you or not, don't ever come up to me again. So I was around 19 and naive. My friends and I were walking home from a night out, and we decided we just didn't want to wait until we made it back to my buddy's house to smoke a J. I was the only girl, and for some reason I had decided to go all out on my outfit this night. Beaded skirt, sequin shirt, and heels. I walked about 30 feet ahead of my friends and asked literally every person if they had any smoke that they could spot us. It only took 4 people. Thanks, outfit. A couple of guys in their late 20s said they had me covered. My friends walked up and somehow we decided to smoke at my friend's house, kind of defeating the point of asking these fine young lads, but I digress. We all went back to my buddy's place and smoked a J or two. The one guy seemed interested in me and I was single and DTF, so we exchanged Facebook info. A lot of people meet outside bars, right? The first thing that seemed weird to me was, despite the fact that he had introduced himself as Johnny, his Facebook name was Reggie. When I asked, he said he was largely estranged from his family and had chosen a first and last name that spoke more to him. His chosen last name was that of a composer I greatly admired, and it endeared him to me. He went by different names to different people, a fact I didn't think too hard about. So we started hanging out. The second weird thing was, despite his estrangement, he lived with his uncle in a really nice condo. Johnny was 28, if I recall correctly, and I remember being very put off by how callously he treated his uncle, who put him up in this beautiful apartment without charging rent. Johnny was unemployed and without a degree, though he said he spent some time in law school and thought very highly of himself. But he introduced me to some cool music and we had a good time, so whatever, right? One time while I was over, he got into a bad fight with his uncle. We weren't dating, but I thought we were friends, so I asked if he wanted to talk about it. He adamantly said no, but then was silent and moody the rest of the time I was over. Eventually, I had to catch the last bus and announce my intention to leave. He said he'd walk me to the bus. As I'm getting my stuff together, he says, "I can't believe you didn't ask me about it, wench." I was thrown for a total loop by his change in demeanor. I'd never been called a wench before, at least within earshot. I replied that I did ask, and that he had declined to say. He kind of huffed and was silent for the 5-minute walk. The bus came very quickly, and as I go on, he clearly says, "Whatever, wench." So, I don't need that. I text him from the bus that whatever we're doing is over and that he has no right to speak to me that way, especially when I literally did nothing wrong. But I loaned him a piece of sheet music that was really important to me and would have been extremely expensive to replace, so I asked that he return that to me once he can be civil again. He texted me back the next day apologizing and saying that he had taken out his frustrations on me and that wasn't fair, and that I was within my own rights not to want to see him again. He was moving that week, he said. This had not been mentioned before, though we saw each other a couple of times a week, and once he was settled, he'd be happy to return it. A week later, he texted me again, saying he's moved and any time is a good time to pick up the thing. We made a plan. His new place was pretty close to my high school. I went to the new place and it's empty. It was a 2-story plus basement in a not cheap part of town, and he was still unemployed. He kept asking me what I thought and watched my face 100% of the time. The vibes were really weird. I just kept saying that it was nice and other non-committal things. We never went up to the second floor. Eventually he said the music was in his bedroom, in the basement. Weird, but okay. He insisted I go down first because he's giving me the tour. Weird vibes. I went down to an unfinished basement. He directed me to do a 180-degree turn at the bottom of the stairs. I did not enter this room. It had a little step up to a linoleum floor. Inside the room was the only piece of furniture I saw in the whole house, a bed frame with no mattress on it. His bedroom? I don't know. The only other thing visible in the room was my sheet music just inside the open closet. He was still watching my face intently. I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was to the effect of, "Can you grab that for me?" He thought for a second and then went into the room, grabbed the music, and came back and handed it to me. I immediately turned on heel and basically ran up the stairs. Once upstairs, I was literally about to say bye in some polite way when he said, "Come on, chat for a minute," and sat down on the floor of the hallway. I was bad at saying no at this point in my life, so I too slid down the wall to the only available sitting surface. He looked me straight in the eye. The look in his eye was half cold and removed and half gleeful. He asked me in a tone of concealed excitement, "Have you lived a good life?" Past tense. So far, I think I'm a good person. There's still time for improvement, though. I tried to pretend I wasn't perturbed. I honestly don't know how well I succeeded. I was internally freaking out at the implication that my life was over and that I was in this creepy place alone with a man who was enjoying causing me distress. I took out my cell and texted my only friend with a car, who also knew Johnny had been weird to me recently. I texted help, pick me up at my high school. If I don't show up, Johnny's hurt me. I kept chatting while doing this, changing the topic to the weather as something equally banal. And as soon as I saw the first reply from her, I didn't even read it. I just started to put on my shoes and told Johnny I'm leaving. Wow, leaving already? That's a little rude. A flicker of anger broke through his weird, giddy cold affection. Yeah, Kay's waiting for me. She's already at my high school. So you texted her to pick you up while we were hanging out? We already had plans. She knows I was meeting you, though. Well, you're rude. Get out. Okay, then. Classy. Bye. I said and walked out, maintaining my semblance of control. I left and didn't look back, music in hand. Once I was a few houses up the street, though, I bolted. The 15 minutes it took for her to get there were some of the most excruciating in my life. What if he followed me? What if he found me there waiting? He was very tall and obviously stronger than me and could have easily overpowered me if he decided to. I felt stupid and ashamed and scared. Kay wasn't thrilled to be treated like a taxi, especially when the bus was running, but when I told her what happened, she was just as alarmed as I was and understood why I wanted a friend there ASAP. I removed him from Facebook and that was that. I heard he moved to another part of the country and is working at Mickey D's. During my freshman year of college in New Hampshire, a girl in my dorm hall accidentally caused a small dorm room fire by leaving popcorn in too long at 3 a.m. We all had to evacuate, and the fire trucks came and the RAs made a pretty big stink about it. The girl who lit the fire was the subject of many yik-yak jokes, and I felt bad for her because she really wasn't attractive and she looked pathetically lonely, and plus causing microwave fires seemed like a pretty innocent mistake for such harsh comments. A couple days after the incident, I saw her in the resident hall and made casual small talk by asking her how things were poppin', and kinda just checking up on her cause I felt bad. She laughed and that was kinda it, a conversation of about 2 minutes. Fast forward, a week later and I hear a knock at my dorm door and the same girl, who I'm now going to refer to as Popcorn, comes literally running into my room with no hesitation. I didn't even tell her my room number, and at the time I just figured she saw me go in there once because she didn't even know my name at this point. It takes me a second to realize that she is in full-blown tears. There is now a stranger on my bed in tears, and I'm just like, ugh. So I counsel her like the bleeding heart I am and ask what's wrong. She tells me that the black dining hall cook assaulted her and the college wouldn't fire him and she was suffering emotionally because of it. Being a victim of assault myself, I really sympathized with her situation and gave her my phone number in case she needed help walking to the dining hall with a safety net and whatnot. I don't take assault allegations lightly. The night after our conversation in my room, I got a call from her to walk her down to the dining hall because the cook that assaulted her was working that day. I walked her down to get food and she just lit up like a glow stick and a whole new person emerged. It didn't matter that her assailant was in the room. She was talking my ear off about Pretty Little Liars, One Direction, a lot of things I just didn't really care about, but then again, she had no one to talk to and the situation was complicated. I just listened and nodded my head. Over the course of about 2 weeks, give or take, I had walked her down to the dining hall maybe 4 or 5 times. She may have been a victim of assault, but she was also a very annoying and unappealing person. For God's sake, she actually talked about herself in third person. Her story about the assault became inconsistent and there was always new major developments about what had happened, and the story was changed to something much more dramatic and severe. It went from assault to a full-out gang situation as her story developed. She then made a comment one day along the lines of how she wished that someone would drop a bomb on African American people so that they would finally learn to stop doing terrible things. Made me immediately uncomfortable and unsettled. I didn't want to walk her down or interact with her anymore. The week of Thanksgiving reprieve, I went back home to visit my family while Popcorn stayed on campus. During that week, I had 60 missed phone calls from Popcorn. One day, I even had 20 calls in the span of a couple of hours. No normal person does that. Red flags definitely were raising if they hadn't been already. When I got back to the campus, there was a knock on my door, and sure enough, it was Popcorn crying again. She tells me that because I wasn't on campus to protect her, she was assaulted by a Muslim guy while walking to Panera Bread, and the Filipino RA groped and slapped her. If red flags were being raised, then this was full-on sirens. I'm no apologist by any means when it comes to these situations, but the ratio rate was exceptionally high, especially since these 3 assaults happened within a month's time frame, all by people of color, seemingly at random. She was making these stories up to elicit some sick form of sympathy. As an actual victim of assault, I was beyond offended. I told her I had to leave for class and ran off to my friend to ask for advice. It got crazy really fast. I warned the RA officers about her, and they told me they would talk to her. During class, I was up to 100+ missed phone calls and a series of individual messages that just said, "Hi." I was done with this. I wanted nothing to do with her. I blocked her number and went back to my dorm. That week after classes, I just went straight to my dorm. I did not want to see her. One day, I had to go to the bathroom, so I walked to the stall to do my business. I'm just casually in there peeing with my pants around my ankles when Popcorn literally crawls on the bathroom floor and dips her head underneath the stall and says, "Ha! I knew you would eventually come out." I am freaked out and in near tears. I tell her that I'm wicked busy and I don't have time for her, and that I was upset for her invading my privacy like that. It took a lot of courage to do because I struggled deeply with confrontation. She tells me all about how she is thinking of dying because her mom died when she was young. Some manipulative crap that I was just not in the mood for. I leave her in the bathroom and go to my room and lock the door. I watched some YouTube and took a nap when I was rudely awakened by not knocking, but pounding on my door. I didn't answer. The pounding just continued and got louder. "Open this door, I'm going to kill you. Open this door, I'm going to kill you," she repeated over and over. And she just waited outside my dorm, singing songs in the door cracks for an hour. I was so scared I just cried and called my dad to pick me up from school. I didn't have many friends that lived on campus since it was a small college and a lot of people commuted, and this whole situation just made me feel so isolated. My mental health was deteriorating rapidly. The RAs had been informed of the threats made at my door by other students observing what happened, and she was given a warning, but that was all. One night, I had my boyfriend, who lived 3 hours away at the time, come and spend the night at the college. We had been watching a movie and were napping on my bed when all of a sudden we hear the door open. Like an idiot, I had completely spaced out and forgot to lock the door. Popcorn comes running in and jumped on top of us and says in a baby voice, "Popcorn wants cuddles." I was beyond creeped out and was basically screaming at her. My boyfriend, being the no-nonsense confrontational person he is, told her to get absolutely out of my room. She told him that she would, and I quote, "would just go die like her mother did when she was 3 and inject cancer into herself." My boyfriend smiled and said, "Good," and then pushed her out of the room and slammed the door, not caring at all. I swear he almost slammed her fingers shut. I love him. We reported her to the campus police in the morning, and still nothing major came of it. That was until there was another popcorn fire in her dorm room not too far after, and she got kicked out. I wish that's where the story ends with her, but unfortunately no. After she left the dorms, my resident life became a lot easier. I made a lot of new normal friends, and I was feeling a lot less anxious. One day, a girl in one of my classes invited me to go to the mall with her to go get her nails done. Now, this nail salon had clear glass so you could see the rest of the outside mall when you were getting your nails did. I'm all relaxed when all of a sudden I see Popcorn's face pressed up against the wall of this nail salon, and she is with a morbidly obese neckbeard. I'm getting my nails done and she is literally staring at me through the window for a good 10 minutes with this man. To say that I was unnerved was an understatement. I told my friend what was going on and we booked it out of there, and they tried hard to follow. In retrospect, that is when I should have called the real police. After the mall, I had a bunch of random friend requests from profiles with a small Yorkie dog as the profile pic and several message requests. I opened them and they were from Popcorn asking me to be her bridesmaid at a Pizza Hut wedding that her and her fiancé were having in 2 years. You can't even make this stuff up. There was another message about how she was so upset that I didn't acknowledge her at the mall, and she had been waiting so long to introduce me to her doting fiancé, and she was so upset with me that she wanted to wring my neck. Of course, I blocked all those profiles and things were pretty silent. I've been living with my boyfriend and going to school in Rhode Island for 2 years currently. I'm loving school and I have an excellent group of friends. About 5 months ago, I had got home from work and I had 3 missed calls from a random New Hampshire phone number. Thinking it was one of my family members, I called back and nope, it was Popcorn on the other end. I immediately hung up. There was also a voicemail left that was just a person breathing in the phone and telling me that I was expected at the wedding. I cried and called the police urgently about the number. I don't know what happened or if anything did come of it, but I haven't been bothered since. I'm a very kind person and people often take advantage of my openness. It really is a fatal flaw that I'm working really hard on. It's unfortunate that there are so many unhinged and lonely people, but we really shouldn't make it our burden to help them. Sometimes being nice can actually cause a lot of mental strain. The following experience happened to me over the course of 1999 to 2000. I was 13. My dad had taken up a new hobby, local auctions. We lived in the sticks of south central Pennsylvania. The Mason-Dixon line was almost my backyard. The spattering of towns around us were all very small, mostly just huge expanses of farmland, cornfields, and a lot of general rundown old barns. There were 2 major auctions locally, Stoner's auction on Sundays and Worley's auction on Tuesday evenings. I was going through puberty kind of early and was very angsty and emotionally dramatic. The previous year I had my first boyfriend, but his parents didn't approve of our relationship and forbade us from seeing each other. Somehow it worked. The only tie I had to him was that my dad had told me he spotted him at Worley's one Tuesday night when I wasn't there. From then on, I never missed Worley's. I always held out hope that I'd see him again. Sadly, I never did. As a teenager, I always had a notebook and a pen on me. I would go places just to write in my journal, not paying attention to anything around me. This habit eventually led to me getting kicked out of our church's youth group, but that's another story for another day. Many of the nights, Dad and I would go to Worley's. My younger sister would come along and we would run around and play, sometimes going a little too far off from the crowds. She remembers this particular individual I'm about to describe too. One night, I noticed an elderly man with very deep, caring eyes. I can still picture his face so clearly. He smiled and winked at me, and I guess in my hormonal confusion, I felt a little bit of a thrill at the attention. And maybe the second time, possibly the third time. But one night I felt someone brush my bottom, more than just what you'd expect from someone walking in close quarters behind you, more of an open hand slide across my butt. I remember I was wearing this ridiculous biking outfit I had bought at Walmart. It was silky and I was getting a lot of compliments from boys when I wore it. The feeling of that hand totally sliding across the silky fabric of my pants stands out so clearly in my memory. Another night, I was sitting there, writing in my notebook, and he walked by and nudged my pen. It made me mess up what I was writing and look up. He winked at me. There was this really sad look of longing in his eyes. I still felt like this was just some weird old guy, no one to be afraid of. There were so many weird old men at these places, as long as I stayed near to my dad. But when he showed up at the other auction, Stoner's on Sundays, I was a little shaken. I want to say a little time had passed. I remember I was all fancied up in my awkward glitter makeup and rebellious outfit. I was sitting there writing in my journal next to my little sister when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around. There he was, sitting right behind me. There was an expanse of open seats, and it was very clear he didn't just happen to be sitting there. He had definitely come over just to talk to me. "How can I get to know you better?" he said in a controlled, barely audible voice. At this point, I was almost positive that I said, "Well, I don't know what you want to know. I'm only 13 years old." Looking back, that makes sense because after waiting a little while and saying it again, I ignored him and he left. Maybe my saying that aloud was enough to make him feel like others might take notice. It really scares me to think about my little sister sitting beside me hearing all of this. She had absolutely zero awareness of keeping herself safe from strangers, and I told her not to go to the bathroom or anywhere without me that day. That might have been the day he told me his name, Wilmer. I saw Wilmer one more time. It was a Tuesday night. It was in the late summer and was so hot. The auction was very packed and my dad had to park the car way off the main area, sort of up in a wooded spot on the property. It was not directly visible to the auction goers. So me, being an annoying brat after begging to go with him, I asked my dad if I could go up to the car. I wanted to listen to my Walkman and drink my Mountain Dew and write. It wasn't as hot where the car was. Dad gave me the keys. I must have asked him when he was in the middle of bidding on something because I still do not know why he would allow me to do this if he had thought about it for 1 second. I had kept him informed about Wilmer. I remember sitting in the 1988 Oldsmobile Cutlass Sierra with the windows rolled all the way down. I hadn't seen Wilmer in the crowd, so I wasn't concerned about safety. Suddenly, I heard a knocking through the music on my headphones. I pulled them off quickly. Wilmer was standing right at the window on the driver's side, sticking his head in the window. "Hot enough for ya," he said, not worried about controlling his voice as no one was near. I did what made the most sense, almost on autopilot. I got out of the car as fast as I could. I stood there and yelled, "Hey, why do you keep following me everywhere?" I'm sure my voice was loud enough that someone could have easily heard. He was immediately unnerved. "What do you mean, following you? I've been coming to these auctions for years," he said, his voice suddenly back to that quiet monotone. I could not believe he had literally leaned his upper body into the car, and despite being very naive, I knew this was completely inappropriate. I said in a louder voice, "Listen, you're making me feel very uncomfortable, sir. I'm going to get my dad." I didn't move, but I had my dad's huge key ring in my hand. I briefly considered worst-case scenario and stuck my middle finger into the ring. I could maybe hit him as hard as I could with the key in my fist. This man started running. Not walking at a brisk pace like most elderly men might do, I mean running, down the little embankment. I went to my dad and pulled him aside to tell him what had happened. He told me he'd take care of it and started looking through the crowd for Wilmer. He was gone. That night I cried and panicked all night long, terrified every time the phone rang or there was a noise outside the house. I figured if he wanted, he could find where I lived. I stopped going to the auctions, and my dad says he never saw Wilmer after that night. He wasn't lying either, when he said he had been going to these auctions for years. It was odd that he stopped going to both of them so abruptly, but then again, not. At the time I lived in Aberdeen, Scotland, I was a 24-year-old Scottish guy who shared a flat with a 27-year-old Romanian girl. We were friendly, but not friends, and on her birthday, she asked me if I wanted to go out for a few drinks with her and her friends. She worked at this really cheap and depressing stripper's joint behind the bar so we could get free drinks. I already had plans, luckily, so I didn't go with her. I had been there with her before, and it was grim. So anyway, we both go out on separate nights out. I come home a little schwasty about 1:30 to 2 or 3 a.m., grab some water, brush my teeth, and get to bed. I get woken up at about 4 or 5 a.m. by some doors in the flat opening and closing in what sounds like some drunken staggering, so I assume she's just a little out of it, no big deal. After a while, I can make out her talking quietly in the lower tones of a man responding. I am kind of surprised at this, as she had never once brought someone back from a night out, but hey, it's her birthday and I'm not one to judge. Just to make sure that they know they've woken me, however, and to try and make sure I don't have to hear anything more, I do a rather loud forced cough so that they will hopefully keep it down. I hear a door close and think good, so I go back to sleep. We both sleep in the next morning, but I am up first and start making breakfast in the kitchen. Eventually she comes through, looking terrible after having been sick in the toilet. She starts getting some water, and I cheerily ask her, "Have a fun night last night?" She kind of blearily responds, "Yeah, it was okay." And I'm like, "Nice try. I know you brought a guy back." And she goes white. Startled, she says, "That actually happened?" Confused, and by her reaction I ask, "What do you mean?" She says, "I thought that was a bad dream." Turns out, she didn't bring him back. He had followed her home. The lock at the entry to our block of flats was broken at the time. She had left the strip club after starting to feel really drunk and sick, and she hadn't locked the door to the flat itself as she came in because she thought that she was going to be sick. She rushed to the toilet. When she went back to her bedroom undressed and got in bed, she was almost asleep when she realized she wasn't alone in her room. She had managed to stammer the question, "What do you want?" Alarmed, he had loudly and hurriedly replied, "I just want water." She said, "I can get you some water," trying to keep calm in the hopes it wouldn't escalate then. Then my cough. My extra loud and hopefully masculine-sounding cough startled him, and the prospect of a man in the flat apparently scared him off as he then ran out of the room. That or the fact that she wasn't unconscious. She hurriedly locked the door and went back to bed and passed out. I made her report the incident to the police. They immediately sent 2 officers round, and they interviewed her and scoured through CCTV. This was apparently not the first time this happened in the area, and it appeared this man was working his way up to an attack of some kind. They said it was lucky I coughed and spooked him. They were also convinced that he had likely slipped something into her drink, but she didn't want to have her urine tested. I think she had been doing something else as well. They wanted to make sure that she hadn't just mistakenly invited him back, and she pointed out that there was no chance of this as he wasn't her type. When they reviewed the CCTV, he could clearly be seen following her home, but they couldn't figure out where he went when he left out the flat. So, to that creep that was inside my flat one night uninvited, stay away. Around 2012, I lived in the industrial part of a city where there weren't many houses nearby, just warehouses, trains, and some businesses scattered around. Even during the day, it was rare to see people walking around unless it was to or from the bus stop. One night, I was feeling off, like maybe my boyfriend and I had been arguing or my roommates were getting on my nerves. I decided that I needed to go for a walk. It was cold and late, past midnight. I just really needed some fresh air and time alone. I was a 21-year-old girl who, at that point in life, wasn't very concerned about my own safety or well-being. I wouldn't say that I thought I was invincible, and I've definitely did some careless and stupid stuff that I am lucky to have survived. This would qualify as one of them. I threw on my long trench coat, combat boots, a big fuzzy hat, and took off in a rush. There wasn't anything particularly scenic or pleasant around there, so I just went in the direction I knew best, toward the liquor store about a half-mile away. As I approached the store, I reached in my pocket and realized I had forgotten my wallet and my phone. The store was closed anyway, so I kept walking. Still in the light of the neon liquor signs, I heard a car approach me and press on the brakes. I slowly looked over my shoulder to see the tip of my boyfriend's '90s silver Buick LeSabre moving alongside me. Relieved, I looked to the driver's seat and see a man who was definitely not my boyfriend. He rolls down the window and says, "Get in the car." I was completely caught off guard, shocked and confused and honestly kind of angry. "What? No," was my response as I kept walking. He kept pace with me as I continued down the block. I kept looking over and finally said, "Buzz off, man." But he didn't do anything, just kept right beside me, staring at me with the window down. Suddenly he sped off and a wave of relief came over me. I really didn't know what to do next, so I cut around a corner and started walking on the opposite side of the street back toward my house, toward the oncoming lane in case he came back around, which he did. He would stop and then creep forward as I walked, all the while mumbling things to me. He definitely seemed to believe that I was going to get in the car with him because he surely was not taking no for an answer. This time, at least, there was a whole lane between us, but I really had nowhere to go. If I decided to take off running to my house, there was only one way to get there, through the deserted industrial area following on down the road which led into a tunnel under the train tracks. He would be able to follow me right to my door easily with no witnesses. There was a 24-hour convenience store a mile in the other direction, but was that really my best option? I felt hopeless. Out of nowhere, I heard the chatting sound of people in an unmarked building beside me. Without a second thought, I frantically pushed the door in and entered a scene that I will never forget. It was a bunch of sweaty men smiling and speaking to each other in Italian as they cheered and finished their beers as they packed up their ping-pong paddles. They all stopped and looked at me as I shakily exclaimed, "There's a man following me outside, and I'm really scared." It was silent for a second as they all eyed one another suspiciously, but one guy eventually offered me a ride home. I was so thankful to be in this stranger's fancy car for a whole minute and a half. I kept apologizing and thanking him. He was just kind of like, "Oh, it's okay. Be safe." Sketchy-looking girl who just busted into our weekly tournament, "You weirdo, please don't rob me." When I got home, I immediately looked up the non-emergency police line but decided against calling because, like I said, the dude was in the exact same make, model, and color as my boyfriend's car. It was likely to be in the same area shortly. Looking back, I probably should have made the call. When said boyfriend did get home, he was furious with me that I would put myself in that situation. Like, sure, that was a dumb move by me, but what about the guy who just lazily tried to kidnap me? Who does that? I met James through a friend, very briefly at a concert in which his band was performing. We barely spoke, but I gave him a hug when I was leaving because I'm a friendly person and he was close to my best friend Harry. Potentially a mistake. I should have just ignored him that night, or at least left it at surface politeness. I no longer smile at strangers or act overly friendly with just anyone, and this is partly the reason why. A few days later, he messaged me. We talked for a bit, and it was nice. But then 2 weeks later, he told me that he was falling in love with me. Perhaps this should have been a red flag, but I try not to think too much of it. He was a sensitive bassist in an indie pop band. Of course he was a hopeless romantic. Not only that, he was very innocent and childlike. When I relayed what he had told me to Harry, he told me to be kind when letting James down. His father was a schizophrenic, his mother was an alcoholic, and James himself was on the spectrum, which also easily attached to people as a result of his difficult upbringing. I understood, as I have borderline personality disorder, and I empathized with his quick attachment to me. Regardless, I told him that I wasn't ready to date. This wasn't a lie just to let him down easy. I was still grieving after the recent death of a boy that I was friends with and liked. I didn't tell him this, so the fact that he took my rejection so well was nice to see. Over the month, our conversations died down until we didn't speak anymore, and then a year and a half later he messaged me again. We fell back into the same way that we were, and he didn't drop any love confessions this time. Not yet, at least. A few weeks in of reuniting as friends, he asked me out on a date. I was comfortable with dating again, so I told him, why not? He was kind and sensitive, which was something that I thought I needed, as I usually go for the strong, assertive, rather arrogant type. The only problem was lining up our schedules. I was at university, already too busy with work in my final year, but he said that he would wait until my workload had lessened. While I didn't have any feelings for him, this warmed my heart to hear. Our sporadic conversations carried on, always so innocuous and nice. Until one day, out of the blue, he sent me a long paragraph, basically telling me that he understood if I had found someone new and thought that this new person was better and didn't want to go on a date with him anymore. Where had this come from? I hadn't told him about any new friends, and I hadn't posted anything that would signify myself meeting another guy. I suddenly felt very uneasy. Laughing it off, I asked him why he had suddenly had these doubts. He told me that he was sorry. He was just overthinking things. And again, like when he had told me he loved me 2 weeks after meeting me, I tried to let go of it. But I remained wary. I very much dislike people who are clingy and suffocate me with their dependence. It makes me feel uncomfortable and overwhelmed. This is even more amplified when the person puts me on a pedestal like James did. He constantly complimented me and told me how I was too good for him, too good for anyone. Everything culminated a few days ago. Busier than I had ever been before with essays due and exams coming up, I was surprised when James texted me and told me that he'd be around in a week if I wanted to go for a date then. I said, unfortunately, no, I've got too much to do. He immediately assumed that this meant that I was no longer interested in him. I snappily asked him why he was acting so entitled, and why did he assume that just because I want to focus on finishing this term with straight A's suddenly meant that I disliked him. He apologized very quickly, but feeling angry, I went to bed instead of replying to him. When I woke up, I turned on my phone and was instantly ambushed by what felt like a million notifications. All texts, all from him, 26 of which was a novel, some excerpts. Move on. There are better people out there. I've been alone for so long, I'm cynical now. I hate this planet, and you need someone who is happy. I don't compare to your intellect, and one day you'll be bored of me. I feel like I know you even though we've only met once. No, you don't. You don't know anything about me because you've never tried to get to know me. You only know the image of me that you created in your head. There's something genuinely wrong with me, which is another reason why you should run away. I'm not a bad person. I'm just insane. Mental illness is not an excuse to do stuff like this. Every woman I had ever loved has turned me down, and I thought I was cursed because my father told me our family was cursed by an African gypsy. So, potential incel and also kind of a xenophobe? I have no idea. He also pretended to be drunk while saying all of this and later confessed that this was a lie. He also posted a song that he said was about me. Even when I told him to leave me alone, he continued to disparage himself in an attempt to manipulate me. I'm probably going to die alone because of stuff like this, and I would ruin anyone with my self-destructive behavior. And this gem, I have already attempted to end myself, and you can't hate me more than I hate myself. Perhaps it is because we live in a world in the aftermath of Elliot Rodger and that one girl who sent 65,000 texts to her Tinder date, and in one said she wanted to bathe in his blood, but I'm thankful that I avoided a date with this guy. Nonetheless, I regret to inform you that this story does not end here. I told Harry about what James had done. He was seething, but his anger was due to larger reasons. Some night during the period that I was in contact with James, Harry and I hooked up. It ended badly, mainly due to my poor mental state at the time. In February, I received an angry message from James confronting me about my treatment of Harry. Back then, I thought he was merely being a good friend. Oh, how I was wrong. When I detailed what had been going on to Harry and sent him screenshots of the texts, he needed time to process. What I hadn't known all that time was that James had confronted him about the situation with me and given him advice. James never told Harry that he was pursuing me and instead went behind his back, all the while being his shoulder to cry on. Even worse, Harry told me that in February, James had asked him what he would do if one of his friends was dating me, and Harry confessed that it would destroy him. James promised that he would never try anything, but of course he did exactly that several months down the line. Finding out all of this made my skin crawl, and I began to question some things. Did he only confront me about Harry to anger me and drive a wedge between us, or was it so that he could gain information from my side? Had he been orchestrating and planning things for months before we tried to rekindle our friendship? Harry said something that makes me believe that James tried to manipulate this months in advance. According to him, James relayed that I had said something very harsh and cruel that caused Harry to have a mental breakdown and led him to doubt every relationship in his life, something so bad that he couldn't even repeat it to me. I know for a fact that I've never said anything to James that I did not say to Harry, and while I said some unkind things to Harry, there was never anything that pushed him over the edge, meaning that James added this little tidbit of information himself. I have blocked James on everything, but I'm still afraid that he may snap and do something dangerous. For some background, I am a recovering sex addict, and before I got my head together, I went through episodes where I would go through a large number of partners, and eventually that wasn't enough to satisfy my impulses, so I started involving myself in BDSM circles and activities, so naturally, I joined a fetish social network. I was really surprised to see a message from somebody who was incredibly attractive asking a simple message about my username. As an early 20s girl, often the messages I would get would be from middle-aged guys looking to spice up their lives, and normally the messages were quite vulgar. We clicked almost instantly, and he seemed quirky and interesting. We talked for about a week before arranging to meet up. Now, I'm from a small city, so it's not strange to have mutual friends with these random encounters that you meet around the place. It just so happened that this guy, we'll call him Rob, sits next to one of my best friends at work. I also work at this company, but in a different contract. I told my buddy Gary that I planned on meeting up with Rob, and Gary was a little hesitant, saying that he is a bit on the spectrum and doesn't do well in social situations. He said that if I were anyone else, he would be incredibly apprehensive, as he wasn't sure how they would mesh in this situation. However, I am odd, so that wasn't important to me. Gary found it important to mention that this, as if you're meeting a stranger from the internet, it is handy to have some idea of what they're like in real-life social situations before meeting up. Anyways, fast forward to my date with Rob, and we're getting on well. He's a little erratic in his thought process and very full-on, say that I'm beautiful a lot and kissing me a lot, but other than that, it's going well. I mentioned that I'm an addict and that if I go home with him, I probably won't feel the same way about him afterwards. After a few drinks, I decided to go home with him anyway. He lives with his family. We do it, and that's that. I lose all feelings for him. During the next few days, I informed him of this, as he was constantly texting me, sending me selfies of him doing mundane stuff like smoking, and sending me really long messages about dreams that he had had featuring me. I got a little suffocated and told him I needed some space as my feelings had depleted. He was understanding of this and kept telling me that he thought I was really nice and to be kind to myself. The next day that I was in work, his breaks coincided with mine, and he continuously approached me for the whole day, just making pointless conversation. It was a little annoying, but by the end of the day, after he'd been texting me as the day had gone on, and I'd been dreading seeing him and having to endure more awkward, "Do you often go into town after work?" or "What do you normally do on your breaks?" conversations. I'm allergic. Later that day, Rob had been waiting outside in the building when I finished work. Normally I walk home, but this day I was getting a taxi with a few of the guys that I work with. Rob came over to where we were standing and made more awkward small talk with me. It was so painful at this stage that I lied and told him I needed to go to the bathroom. So I walked into the building and made sure to spend as much time as I could in there, like peeing and getting coffee. At this stage, my phone said that the cab was 3 minutes away, so I decided to brave it by going back outside, hoping that Rob was gone by this stage. He wasn't. He was still there, lingering around my buddies, not making conversation. I was stressed at this stage, and he'd notice, mentioning how he felt anxious and whatnot, but this was maybe the 5th time that I heard this, so I was noticeably fed up. He also asked again if it was okay to text me, to which I said, let's talk about it later, as there was an audience of people next to us. I said I was going to wait by the road, and he finally left. There was an issue with the taxi, which caused it to be a little late. Now, I am going to add that I know that my reactions throughout this entire thing haven't been ideal. I have issues around confrontation and saying no. Needless to say, these issues led to enabling Rob a little bit, and I understand that. Later that evening, I got more pointless texts from Rob. Ones like, "Hope you had a good catch-up with your crew. You're a good person. Sorry for being so awkward. How has your evening been going? Did I do something wrong? I hope I haven't pushed you away. You're a good person." Blah, blah, blah. None of which I responded to, as I was otherwise preoccupied that weekend. The next day, he tried to call me twice, and the day after that, I woke up to another 2 missed calls from him. At this stage, again, apologetically, I told him that with my plans to move and with the issues I've been having personally, intimacy issues, I was in quite a precarious situation and that he was overbearing and it became a little overwhelming and that we shouldn't talk so much. He sent a long message explaining how he gets attached easily and that he understands totally. He then asked if I wanted him to stop approaching me at work and if I wanted him to stop texting me at work, to which I said yes and that space would be good. Over the next 13 days, I received 6 messages from him. The usual gobbledygook like, be kind to yourself. If you ever need to vent, I'll listen to you. I hope I'm not being a pest. I wanted to send you a message as a positive affirmation. Random drawings of venom that he did. Be kind to yourself. He said that a lot. I had enough at this stage and sent him a firm message. I will happily add the exact message in later if anyone's interested, but basically stating that I didn't want to pursue a relationship with him, romantic or otherwise. He replied saying that it really wasn't a good time for him as he was dealing with a major depressive episode at the moment, but that he would now be a ghost to me, and as I only had a few weeks left in the company. But I actually has changed since then. I'm now staying, but he again said to be kind to myself. So I thought that was that. Until I often post on Reddit about issues concerning my addiction and intimacy issues. My profile is very personal. As I'm also a very open person, I linked Rob something that I had posted. Not relevant, it was about a dream that I had, meaning that he had access to my username from when we first started talking. About 2 weeks after I cut contact with him, I received a reply on something that I had posted to Ask Reddit, detailing how this person had major issues with addiction and that they couldn't handle it anymore. This is not entirely relevant to the question that I posted, so I immediately knew something was up. Initially, I thought this could have been someone that I know, just messing with me, but after a few minutes it clicked. It was Rob. Rob had gained access to my account by going back through about 100 messages and using the knowledge that he had from my previous posts, used my personal issues against me in order to somehow figure out the inner mechanism of my brain in order to infiltrate his way back into my life. Initially, I thought I was crazy. Without going into detail, it was confirmed that this was Rob. I was really taken aback about it. It seemed too bizarre to believe, but I didn't have any feelings about it that I knew of at that point. I spoke to my friends about it, and they all thought the situation was really freaky. I told my group therapy about it, and they said that Rob was a stalker, and that I should tell the company that I work with about it in case he does something to someone else at work, or to me. Following this advice, I spoke to my manager, her manager, and eventually HR, without giving any names but seeking advice. I was told that I could speak to an HR person or that I could use someone from HR almost as a messenger if I wanted, but I'm not sure. In terms of how I'm feeling, it's been a roller coaster. Initially, I felt nothing, felt like I was making a big deal out of nothing. Then I started getting severe anxiety surrounding this. I decided not to apply for a role that I otherwise would have, as it was for his contract. I would have dreams about him doing awful stuff to me. I would constantly be looking around the building to see if he was there. One day walking home, I even kept an eye on if anyone was following me. This wore off a little. Not sure if it's the result of me trying to avoid the situation, or if I'm just not afraid of him anymore, but I still get glimpses of that anxiety. His breaks coincidentally started coinciding with mine recently. This could be a genuine coincidence, but I know from Gary that they decide their own breaks and mine are the same, always, which he knows. Rob has been asking Gary about me and started trying to get closer with him. He even asked a girl that I know, whom he also works with, about me. I barely even speak to this girl. Recently, someone started following me on my main account. Realistically, it could be anyone. I post a lot, but my brain instantly assumed that it's Rob. I even set the text under my account as Go Away Rob. This is crazy. I'm not sure about a resolution as of yet. The official route seems scary to me. There is still a part of me that thinks that I'm making a big deal out of nothing. If he made one more move that was out of line, I think I would consider getting one of my friends to speak to him. Group says that his obsession will only grow, and if I'm in this company permanently now, I think I should definitely do something about it. I guess I'm just looking for some outsider perspective, as well as an opportunity to vent and clear my head. "4 years ago, but I still remember it like it was yesterday." The quote's actual words he said. I had told this story to a friend right after it happened, when everything was still fresh. I was living in a new state and wanted to mingle with the singles, so I set up an account on OkCupid. I matched with this guy, we'll call him Justin, who also just moved to the area, and we decided to get dinner at a local bar. Dinner was great. Justin was great. He was ridiculously tall, 6'6", and very country. He was a fresh breath of air from all of the hipsters in the town, and I was already making plans to see him again. We walked around downtown a bit after dinner, and he invited me back to his place for drinks. I agreed to let him drive me in his truck, as I had been drinking and didn't feel comfortable driving my own car. We get back to his place, and I decided to check out his basement. I had never seen one before, while he makes us some drinks upstairs. I was pretty naive, okay? We go upstairs to his room, drinks in hand, and we're sitting on the bed talking about his experience in the military. Justin is still being a super nice guy, but he starts to get really pushy about me finishing my drink. As I bring the glass up to my mouth, I notice some pink powder at the bottom of the glass. I pull it back to study it, thinking the cup was dirty. He watches me look at it and says, I've only used that cup for water. It's fine. I take a sip of the drink, and it was extremely bitter, like when you let a pill linger in your mouth a bit too long. My gut instinct was to pour it out, but he kept insisting I drink, so I kept taking tiny little baby sips so I wouldn't appear rude. Curious about his military experience, I asked him if he killed anyone while he was deployed, and his whole face lit up like it was Christmas. He said, "Yeah," and I enjoyed every minute of it. Then proceeds to tell me all about it. At this point, I started to get really uncomfortable and wanted to leave. I couldn't just leave, though, because I didn't have my car. He then tells me that even back home in Montana, he's done some things because things happen in the country and it's a place where the law doesn't always hold up. I started feeling a little spacey from the drink, so I put it down and tell him I'm not really interested in it anymore. He asks me what my greatest fear is. I tell him, and he responds with, "Oh, weird. Most women fear having a man force themselves upon them." I didn't know what to say, but he laughed it off and switched back to nice guy Justin. We were having normal conversation about life, and I decided to lay down in his bed where I find a gun under his pillow. Cue scary Justin. He tells me that it's only for protection, but tells me that he'd love to be intimate with a woman at gunpoint someday. He grabs the gun and starts playing with it, and I'm convinced this is the day I'm about to die. Yes, it took all of this before I felt that way because his roommates were home when I got there, so I felt safe. He proceeds to tell me that his absolute greatest fantasy is kidnapping a random woman, keeping her as a slave, and then ending her. I don't even question it because he's basically quivering at the thought of it. I feel helpless and terrified. I notice my phone is dying and I start thinking of an escape plan. I wasn't sure that my puny 5'4" self would be able to successfully fight his muscular 6'6" military experience. He lays down next to me, starts to touch me, and I go completely frozen in fear. I guess at some point his roommates left because we hear them walking through the front door and up the stairs. His whole demeanor goes cold. He stands up and says that he's taking me back to my car. I'd never felt more grateful in my life when I saw my car sitting in front of the bar. I drove around town for a while to make sure he wasn't following me, and promptly blocked and deleted all of his contact info. In hindsight, I should have alerted the authorities, but I figured it wouldn't have gone anywhere with no evidence of wrongdoing. I'll be glad never to lay eyes on him again, and can only hope that his greatest fantasy is never lived out. What is HelloFresh? HelloFresh is a meal kit delivery service that shops, plans, and delivers step-by-step recipes and pre-measured ingredients so you can just cook, eat, and enjoy. There's something for everyone with HelloFresh's selection. 3 plans to choose from: classic, veggie, and family. Each box is made up of fresh, reasonably obtained ingredients from carefully selected farms and high-rated trusted sources. Make family dinners fuss-free with HelloFresh's picky eater, kid-tested, and approved family plan recipes. Each week there's a 20-minute meal on the classic menu for when you really don't have more time than that. Rediscover the excitement of cooking. Look forward to your HelloFresh delivery knowing dinner just got that much easier. Feel confident when cooking HelloFresh with the simple recipes outlined on pictured step-by-step instruction cards. Global Eats options bring authentic international dishes and flavor to home cooks for exciting new meals. Enjoy not having to plan dinner, spending money on takeout for an easy night, or worry about gathering ingredients week after week. HelloFresh believes cooking should be simple and convenient, not a chore. All the ingredients come pre-measured in handy, labeled meal kits so you know which ingredients go with which recipe. Won't spend all night in the kitchen because recipes only take around 30 minutes. Delivered right to your door in recyclable insulated packaging. Lots of one-pot recipes for seriously speedy cooking and minimal cleanup. Cooking becomes something you actually want to do when you get home from work. There are many benefits of subscribing, so you can keep enjoying HelloFresh week after week. Spend less time meal planning and grocery shopping each week and get that time back to do more of what you love. Get out of that recipe rut and start cooking outside of your comfort zone by discovering new, delicious recipes in each week's box. Get delicious, filling meals delivered right to your door every week for less than $10 per serving and free shipping. Making an account is so easy to manage with the ability to choose your delivery date to match your ever-changing schedule and pause deliveries for when you're on vacation. Now, I personally was really impressed with how things arrived. In simple, easily recyclable packaging that amazingly kept all the ingredients super fresh. The quality of the ingredients was very impressive, as I'm one to always go the extra mile when choosing a quality protein. And each meal comes with its own incredibly simple-to-use recipe card. That was very aesthetically pleasing as well. My favorite meal thus far has to be the panned roasted chicken. The recipe guide walked me through the entire process, incredibly simple, and I was serving up a beautiful meal for two in no time. Personally, I never really thought you could capture such quality in a home-delivered system, and I can't wait to try the countless other recipes. For an amazing deal and a total of $60 off, that's like $20 off your first 3 boxes, visit HelloFresh.com/read60. That's HelloFresh.com/READ60. It's basically like receiving 6 meals for free or up to 50% off your first 3 boxes. Now that I had my chance to try HelloFresh, it's hands down my favorite meal kit delivery service out there.